Hello guys, today I'm going to be doing a video on Cyberpunk. We just got the update for DLSS 3.0 frame generation, and we're using the RTX 4090 and starting it off at 4K with the max preset. And we also have RT enabled as well, set to Psycho mode. The Overdrive RT isn't out yet with this update, so we've got to wait for that still, but at least we get DLSS 3.0. Alright, let's jump into it and see what we can get. Now jumping into the game, we are almost sitting at 40 FPS. It's honestly pretty impressive. This game is super intensive at the Ultra preset, and RT is enabled as well, don't forget. So not too bad, but the actual experience of the game is pretty poor. The game feels pretty laggy on keyboard and mouse, and there's a bit of stuttering happening as well, which isn't ideal. But the quality looks fantastic, the reflections look amazing and super sharp, and it just looks very clear. But since the FPS is low, let's go and enable DLSS and see what we can get. So going with quality mode for DLSS 2.0 and FG enabled as well, we went from 32 to 35 FPS all the way up to 81 FPS. The responsiveness is about, I would say 40 to 50 FPS. It doesn't feel as good as, like 80 FPS obviously. Now just keep in mind that with FG enabled, the game isn't going to feel more responsive, but it will look smoother. So again, it feels like 40 to 50 FPS, but the visuals themselves look very smooth overall. I think the UI definitely has some issues occasionally, or maybe I'm just seeing things. When I'm panning the camera super quickly, you can see it just like wiggle a little bit. But you know what, I'm like nitpicking at this point. The actual quality of the game looks fantastic, and I think overall looks pretty great too. Now since we're playing the game in 4K, we can push DLSS 2.0 all the way up to performance mode. So I've gone ahead and done that. So let's go and jump into it and see what FPS we get with this. Now jumping right into it, we are sitting at 120 FPS. That is insane. So at native 4K, we're sitting at 30 FPS. And then we jumped all the way up to around 80 FPS with frame generation and quality DLSS 2.0. And now with performance mode, we are sitting at 120. Now as you saw before, with the quality DLSS mode, FPS was far too low, so we had some issues with the UI. Now I'm going to go ahead and pan the camera a little bit as well, and we'll see if the issues still persist here. So for you guys, it'll be zoomed in and in slow-mo, but for me, in real time, I can't tell the difference. It looks just as good as native 4K. It looks amazing, to be honest. It looks fixed. Now finally for 4K, let's go ahead and push DLSS 2.0 all the way up to ultra performance and see the quality and FPS there. Alright, jumping into the actual game, FPS is sitting in the 130s all the way up into the 140s. So we gained around 20 FPS, but as you can see, the car in front of us is actually trailing, so we're losing a lot of quality at this point, and all that for around 20 FPS. And looking at the reflections, they do look pretty blurry if I'm being honest with you. At native 4K or even with the quality DLSS mode, they looked very sharp and very clear. Yeah, look at that. It just, I don't know. Does this look good to you? Because I think it just doesn't look the best. So I think at 4K, the sweet spot for DLSS 2.0 is somewhere between balance and performance. FPS is going to be sitting in the 90s and 110s, so the game will be very responsive and very fluid, and the quality will look just as good as native 4K as well. Now one thing I just realized is the power draw. We're pulling around 290 to 310 watts of power on the GPU side, which is honestly pretty impressive. With the 3080 I'm pulling around 340 to 350 watts of power. If you undervolt it, then it will pull 320 watts I guess, so it's pretty good there. But still, with the 4090, with these presets, I'm pulling 300 watts, so it's still under the 3080. Now one thing that we should test with DLSS 3.0 is the shooting. So we're here in the pickup, and FPS is sitting in the 140s. The game feels incredibly smooth still, as you would expect. But I want to test this out at a lower frame rate. So at 4K max settings, we're sitting at 30 FPS. So let's do that again. DLSS 3.0 enabled with quality DLSS. So FPS should be sitting in the 80s and 90s at this point. Oh my god, this feels so laggy. This feels... yeah, this doesn't feel the most responsive, to be honest. This feels like 40 FPS to me. If I disable frame generation, I'll be getting 40 FPS. Wow, 50 FPS. Wow, this feels way smoother without... wait, hold on a second. Did it reset? No, okay, we're using quality preset still. This feels kind of stuttery to be honest at 50 FPS, but the actual responsiveness of the camera and the movements feel very responsive. With FG enabled, with the quality preset, it's so buggy, man. There we go, with the quality preset, this feels like it's running at 30 FPS to 40 FPS. If you go with something like the performance mode, I think it will feel far better. Yeah, for sure feels far better at this point. Feels like I'm running at 70 to 80 FPS. Feels very fluid, very smooth. My aiming feels quite good. Hey you, you're dead. Yeah, the game feels smooth enough to be honest. Now jumping into 1440p max settings, GPU sitting at 95%, FPS is ranging between the low 60s all the way up into the mid 60s. The quality looks pretty fantastic as well. Doesn't look as good as 4K obviously, but still looks pretty great and very sharp. With the 4090, this is already playable. We're getting 60 FPS just fine. So let's go ahead and start it off with just FG and no DLSS 2.0 and see what we can get. We are sitting at 100 FPS. So we gained, what, 40 FPS, 50 FPS? It's pretty amazing. I can't really tell too much of a difference between the smoothness of 60 FPS versus 100 FPS. And looking at the responsiveness and the input lag, the game honestly feels incredibly smooth. It feels like it's running at 60 to 70 FPS right now. Pausing the game, enabling DLSS 2.0. We're going to start it off with the quality preset. Apply. And looking at the quality, it's pretty good. It's not too bad. GPU is sitting at 90% up to 95%, so we're getting bottlenecked by the CPU unfortunately. But regardless of that, FPS is sitting in the 130s to 140s. Looking at the responsiveness, the game feels perfect at this point. It feels super smooth, super responsive. It honestly feels like 120 FPS to me. If I didn't know we had FG enabled, I would feel like I'm running at 120 FPS. This is how smooth it's running. There's no stuttering either. With all these presets, other than 4K native, the game didn't stutter at all. It felt very smooth overall. But honestly, at 1440p, I wouldn't go past the balance preset for DLSS. At 4K, you can use performance mode, but at 1440p and below, it will start to look very blurry, so I wouldn't use them. Okay, so far at native 1080p, the game looks pretty fantastic. Whoa, where did he come from? I swear he wasn't there before. FPS is going to be sitting in the 80s up to the 90s, almost the 100s. Now with just frame generation, FPS is sitting in the 140s. So we went from the 80s to 90s up to the 140s and 150s. That's like a 60 FPS increase. The game looks pretty good still, looks very sharp. I can't really see any extra blurriness from DLSS 3.0. And the responsiveness of the game feels about 80 to 90 FPS, so obviously shouldn't have too many issues there. Now moving on from that, we're playing the game with DLSS 2.0 enabled with the quality preset. At 1080p I wouldn't really go past this to be honest. The game will start looking very blurry and in my opinion not very usable. But we have FG enabled as well. FPS is sitting in the 180s to 190s. GPU is sitting at 92% up to 95%. And we're almost at 200 FPS. We are so close to 200 FPS. I can feel it. Now the game overall does look worse with this preset. I can see some blurriness going on in the distance, and the cars definitely trail as well. So at 1080p it's very questionable. I don't think I would use it personally. I would disable RT and turn the qualities down first before doing so. At 1440p and 4K it's definitely usable. For 1440p I would use the quality or balance DLSS mode with FG enabled, and it runs perfectly. It's very smooth. At 4K you can go up to performance mode for DLSS 2.0 and FG enabled as well. And yeah, overall it should be a great experience. Just make sure your FPS is above 70 or the aiming will feel atrocious. That's pretty much it guys. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. And I'll see you guys in 2 days probably for Dead Space Remake with the RTX 3050.